The history of commercial aviation is full of names that one day were synonymous with prestige and the next disappeared. Pan Am, the airline that invented transatlantic travels, broke in 1991. TWA, another legend, disappeared in 2001. More recently, Flybe, the most important regional airline of Europe, collapsed in 2020. The air industry is a relentless business where margins are so narrow that any crisis, any bad management, any change in the price of fuel can be fatal. In 2026, there is a new list of airlines on the edge of the abyss. Names that still operate, that still sell tickets, but that accumulate debts impossible to pay. Today we're going to reveal the 9 names that you should know, because if you have a ticket with them, perhaps you will take a disagreeable surprise. Let us begin. Pakistan International Airlines, PIA, banned and ruined. If there is an airline that has hit bottom in all senses, that is Pakistan International Airlines. The history of PIA is the history of an unstoppable decline. Founded in 1946, a year before the independence of Pakistan, it came to be one of the most prestigious airlines of Asia. But the decades of bad management, corruption, and political interferences have led it to where it is today, banned in Europe and the United States, with an astronomical debt and a reputation made into shreds. The fatal blow arrived in 2020. An investigation revealed that almost 1/3 of the commercial pilots of Pakistan had fake licenses. They had not passed the exams, they did not have the necessary training, and nevertheless they were flying with passengers on board. The scandal was of such magnitude that the European Union banned P1A from flying in its airspace. The United States did the same. From the night to the morning, the airline lost the most profitable routes, those that connected Pakistan with London, Birmingham, Paris, and New York. Since then, PIA only operates domestic flights into a few destinations in Asia, such as Dubai, Jeddah, and Kuala Lumpur. But even on those routes, the problems accumulate. The debt exceeds $2 billion. The workers carry months without getting paid, the strikes are constant, and the planes stay on the ground for lack of spare parts. The Pakistani government has tried to privatize the airline on several occasions, but no investor wants to buy a company with a reputation so damaged and an obsolete fleet. In 2026, PIA is a walking corpse. If you have tickets with them, it is better for you to look for alternatives, because the probability that those flights are canceled is extremely high. Argentine Airlines, the eternal Argentine problem. To speak of Aerolíneas Argentinas is to speak of a classic in the lists of airlines in crisis. The Argentine flag airline has been decades giving losses, and the successive governments, whether Peronists or Macristas, have tried to privatize it, sell it, close it, or rescue it without success. The problem is structural and seems to not have a solution. Aerolíneas Argentinas has an oversized staff with very high labor costs that are the fruit of decades of collective agreements favorable to the unions. It has an inefficient fleet with old planes that consume more fuel than the modern ones, and it has a network of routes that includes little profitable destinations, such as flights to Patagonian provinces that are maintained for political reasons, not economic. Every time that a government tries to cut routes or reduce personnel, the unions paralyze the country with strikes and the government retreats. In 2026, the situation is more serious than ever. Argentina crosses a deep economic crisis, with an inflation that exceeds 100% annual, a constant devaluation of its currency and international reserves under minimums. The government does not have money to continue subsidizing the airline, which needs monthly transfers of tens of millions of dollars to survive. The attempts to reduce costs clash with the union opposition, and the passengers, fed up with the delays and the cancellations, opt for foreign airlines like LATAM, Copa, or American Airlines to fly abroad, and for low costs like Flybondi or JetSmart to fly within the country. Aerolíneas Argentinas is technically in bankruptcy and only survives thanks to state aids that are each time more difficult to justify. If the airline does not restructure for real, its end may be near, and this time perhaps there is no rescue possible. Kenya Airways, the debt that does not cease. Kenya Airways is one of the most important airlines of Africa, with a strategic position in the east of the continent and a hub in Nairobi that connects with dozens of destinations, but also it is one of the most indebted. The company has been years in losses, accumulating a debt that exceeds $1 billion. The attempts of restructuring have failed once and again, and the shareholders, among whom is the Kenyan government and the KCB Bank, are fed up with putting money. The problems of Kenya Airways are several. On one hand, the competition in Africa is each time greater, with airlines of the Gulf like Emirates, Qatar Airways, and Etihad offering direct flights to the main destinations from their hubs in Dubai, Doha, and Abu Dhabi. These airlines offer comfortable connections and competitive prices and have been stealing passengers from Kenya Airways. On the other hand, the fleet of the airline is old and needs an urgent renovation, but there is no money to buy new planes. The Boeing 737 and 787 that it operates have a high average age, and the maintenance costs skyrocket. In 2026, Kenya Airways follows on the tightrope. The crisis of tourism in East Africa, aggravated by problems of security in some neighboring countries and by the competition from other destinations, has reduced even more the number of passengers. The airline looks desperately for an investor partner, a strategic investor that injects money and management in exchange for a participation. Names like Ethiopian Airlines, the great regional rival, or even some airline of the Gulf have sounded. But the negotiations stretch out and do not arrive at a good port. If Kenya Airways does not find that partner in the next months, it could follow the path of other African airlines and disappear victim of a debt that already is impossible to pay. Czech Airlines CSA, the Czech story that goes out. Czech Airlines, known by its initial CSA, is one of the oldest airlines of Europe. Founded in 1923, it has more than 100 years of history. It was the first airline in the world to operate regular flights exclusively with jets back in the year 60. During the Cold War, it was the entry gate to Eastern Europe for many Western travelers. But history does not pay the debts, and CSA has been years in free fall. The problems of Czech Airlines began much before the pandemic. The competition of the low cost in Europe, like Ryanair and Wizz Air, was eroding its traditional roots. The entry of the Czech Republic into the European Union and the liberalization of the air market allowed dozens of airlines to operate in Prague, and CSA did not know how to adapt. The fleet was reducing, the routes canceling, and the passengers losing. The pandemic was a fatal blow from which it has not recovered. In 2021, Czech Airlines entered into bankruptcy proceedings. It seemed the end, but a group of Czech investors rescued it in extremis. However, the rescue has not served for much. In 2026, the fleet of CSA has been reduced to barely 4 planes, all of them Airbus 320, which operate charter flights for tour operators and some seasonal destinations like Paris or Amsterdam. The airline has stopped flying to the majority of the destinations that made it famous. The workers go, the few planes that remain have maintenance problems, and the brand, which was a national pride, dilutes day by day. Czech Airlines already is not a flag airline, it is a shadow of what it was, and it is probable that in the next months we witness the definitive closure to the end of a centenary story that goes out without making noise. But not all the airlines at risk are in these coordinates, in these countries with structural problems or deep economic crises. To the other side of the world, in the north of Europe, in the islands of the Pacific, in the Asian giant, there are other airlines that also wobble, giants with history, flag airlines, companies that seem solid, but that the perfect storm of the competition, the debts, and the crises has put on the edge of the abyss. In the next chapter, we will travel to Scandinavia, to Fiji, to India, to Sri Lanka, and to Malaysia to know their stories. Airlines that fight to survive, but whose future is uncertain. SAS Scandinavian Airlines, the crisis of Northern Europe. When we think of Scandinavia, we imagine prosperous societies, solid economies, and efficient public services. But not even the Nordic countries get free from the turbulences of the air industry. SAS Scandinavian Airlines, the flag airline of Sweden, Denmark, and Norway, has been years in a desperate fight to survive. And in 2026, its future is more uncertain than ever. SAS has a glorious history. Founded in 1946, it was a pioneer in the transpolar routes that shortened the distances between Europe and North America. During decades, it was the airline preferred by the Scandinavian business travelers, symbol of the Nordic quality and punctuality, but the times change and the competition has become fierce. The principal problem of SAS are its labor costs. The collective agreements in Scandinavia are of the most generous in the world. High salaries, reduced workdays, long vacations, and very strong union protections. That is very well for the workers, but for an airline that competes with low costs like Norwegian, which also had its problems, or Ryanair, it is a slab impossible to lift. SAS has to pay much more to its pilots and crews than its competitors, and that is reflected in the price of the tickets. The pandemic was a very hard blow. In 2020, the planes of SAS stayed on the ground and the revenues plummeted. The airline accumulated debts and had to ask for aids to the Swedish, Danish, and Norwegian governments. But the aids arrived with conditions. There was a need to cut costs, reduce personnel, and restructure. In 2022, SAS filed for Chapter 11 of the American bankruptcy law, a mechanism that allows companies to protect themselves from their creditors while they restructure. It seemed a temporary solution, but the problems have continued. In 2026, SAS continues on the wire. The attempts to reduce costs clash with the union resistance. The Scandinavian governments, which are shareholders, are tired of putting money and want to sell their participations. But to find a buyer is not easy. The airline needs a strong industrial partner, someone that injects capital and management, but also that respects the Scandinavian identity. Names like Lufthansa, Air France KLM, or even IAG, the owner of British Airways, have sounded, but the negotiations stretch out and do not finish by concretizing. Meanwhile, the competition continues pressing. Norwegian, after its own restructuring, has returned to grow. The airlines of the Gulf offer connections to Asia from the Scandinavian hubs with very competitive prices, and the European low-cost continue winning market share on short-haul routes. SAS reduces fleet, cancels routes, and fires personnel, but the losses do not cease. The question is, how much time will it be able to hold on? Will a last-minute rescue arrive, or will we end up witnessing the disappearance of a symbol of Northern Europe? Fiji Airways, the dependence on tourism. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, at thousands of kilometers from any continent, there is a small paradise called Fiji. Its beaches of white sand, its turquoise waters, and its luxury resorts attract travelers from all the world. And the one in charge of bringing those travelers is Fiji Airways, the flag airline of this insular country. But to depend on tourism has a price, and in 2026, Fiji Airways is paying it dearly. The history of Fiji Airways is the history of a relative success. Founded in 1951, it has managed to connect these lost islands with destinations like Australia, New Zealand, the United States, and some points of Asia. Its fleet, although small, is modern, with planes Airbus A330 and Boeing 737 that offer a service very appreciated by the travelers. But its size is also its principal weakness. When the pandemic closed borders in 2020, Fiji Airways was on the edge of collapse. Tourism, which represents 1/3 of the GDP of Fiji, paralyzed completely. The airline stopped receiving practically everything and had to resort to aids from the government and to international loans to survive. It survived, yes, but it remained very weakened. In 2026, the recovery has not been so fast as they expected. World tourism has suffered from inflation, geopolitical tensions, and changes in travel habits. In addition, the competition in the Pacific is each time greater. Airlines like Qantas, Air New Zealand, American Airlines, and United have increased their flights to the islands, offering direct connections from their hubs that compete directly with the routes of Fiji Airways. The airline needs to diversify to find new routes and new markets that do not depend so much on holiday tourism. It has tried to open flights to destinations like Tokyo, Singapore, or Vancouver, but it is not easy to compete with the big Asian ones. Also, it needs to renew its fleet, but the new planes cost tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, and Fiji Airways does not have that money. The government of Fiji, which is the principal shareholder, cannot continue injecting funds without limit. The economy of the country, although stable, is small and vulnerable. If Fiji Airways does not manage to find an investor partner or a strategic alliance that allows it to grow without losing its identity, it could become one more victim of the Pacific. A small airline in an enormous ocean, fighting against giants that can allow themselves losses during years while she cannot allow herself even a stumble. Air India, the giant that seeks to take off. India is one of the air markets of fastest growth in the world. Hundreds of millions of people fly each year, and it is expected that that figure multiplies in the next years. In that market, the flag airline, Air India, should be the queen, but the reality is very different. Air India has a complicated history. Founded in 1932 by the industrialist J.R.D. Tata, it was during decades a symbol of Indian pride, but the decades of state management, political interferences, and lack of investment were sinking it. In 2020, when the pandemic broke out, Air India accumulated debts for billions of dollars and losses year after year. The Indian government, fed up with putting money, decided to privatize it. In 2022, the Tata Group, the same that had founded it 80 years before, recovered the property of Air India. The news was received with hope. The Tatas are one of the conglomerates most respected in India, with experience in very diverse sectors and a reputation for good management. It seemed the beginning of a new era, but the rescue of Air India is not simple. The airline has an enormous debt, an aged fleet, a very rooted corporate culture, and a fierce competition. In the domestic market, Indigo, a low-cost, dominates with an iron hand with more than 50% of market share. SpiceJet, Go First, and others fight for the rest. In the international market, the airlines of the Gulf like Emirates, Qatar Airways, and Etihad offer comfortable connections and competitive prices that attract millions of Indian passengers. The Tatas are investing billions of dollars in renewing the fleet, improving the service, and modernizing the image of Air India. They have ordered hundreds of new planes from Airbus and Boeing, the largest order in the history of aviation. They are reforming the cabins, improving the food, training the crew, but the results take time to arrive. To change the perception of an airline that during decades was synonymous with delays, bad service, and old planes is not done from the morning to the night. In 2026, Air India continues being an airline at risk. The losses have been reduced, but they have not disappeared. The debt continues being enormous. The competition does not give truce. And the passengers, although they start to notice the improvement, still distrust. If Air India does not manage to consolidate its recovery in the next years, if it does not get to win market share and return to be profitable, the dream of the Tatas could become a nightmare, and the flag airline of India could end up being absorbed by another or simply disappear. Sri Lankan Airlines, the island that sinks. Sri Lanka is a country with a millenary history, a fascinating culture, and an exuberant nature, but also it is a country that has lived one of the most serious economic crises of its history. In 2022, the inflation skyrocketed, the international reserves were exhausted, food, fuel, and medicines were lacking. The government collapsed, the president fled, and the country was on the edge of the abyss. In that context, Sri Lankan Airlines, the flag airline, could not come out well. Sri Lankan Airlines was founded in 1979. During years, it had a strategic alliance with Emirates, which managed the airline and helped it to grow. But the alliance ended in 2008, and since then, the airline has been going downhill. The problems of management, the corruption, and the lack of investment have been sinking it. The economic crisis of Sri Lanka was a fatal blow. The debt of Sri Lankan Airlines, which already was high, skyrocketed. The government, which is the principal shareholder, does not have money to rescue the airline. The attempts to privatize it have failed once and again. In 2024, it was tried to sell it, but no investor presented a convincing offer. In 2025, it was tried again with the same result. In 2026, Sri Lankan Airlines is in a critical situation. The fleet has been reduced to a dozen planes, all of them leased and with contracts that expire. The routes have been canceled one after another. It already does not fly to Europe except to London, and that route is in doubt. The flights to India, which were its main market, have been cut. The passengers flee to other airlines. Emirates, Qatar, Etihad, Air India all offer better connections and better service. The workers have been months with delays in the payments. The suppliers demand cash payments. The planes have maintenance problems. Sri Lankan Airlines is a terminal patient in a bankrupt country. If a miraculous investor does not appear, if there is no last-minute rescue, the airline will disappear, and with it, a part of the history of Sri Lanka will be lost. Malaysia Airlines, the airline of the tragedies. There are airlines that have suffered accidents, that have passed through crises, that have had to restructure, but few have lived what Malaysia Airlines. In 2014, the Malaysian airline suffered two of the greatest tragedies of the history of aviation. On March 8th, Flight 370 disappeared from the radar with 239 people on board. To this day, it is not known what happened. The remains never appeared, the theories multiply, the mystery follows without being solved. 4 months later, on July 17, Flight 17 was shot down by a missile over Ukraine, killing the 298 people that were traveling on board. Those two blows, united to a deficient management and to the fierce competition in Southeast Asia, led Malaysia Airlines to the edge of bankruptcy. The passengers stopped flying with it. The routes emptied. The losses accumulated. The Malaysian government, owner of the airline, had to nationalize it again and inject money to save it. In the following years, Malaysia Airlines tried to restructure. It reduced fleet, canceled routes, fired personnel, changed image. But the weight of the accidents continues being very heavy. Every time that someone looks for a flight to Malaysia, they remember what happened. Every time that a passenger gets on a plane of Malaysia Airlines, they think of the 370. In 2026, the airline continues without raising its head. The competition in Southeast Asia is fierce. Singapore Airlines, Thai Airways, Vietnam Airlines, the low-cost like AirAsia all fight for the same cake. Malaysia Airlines is one more, and it is not the best. Its fleet is old, its service is improvable, its image is damaged. The airline looks for investors. There have been conversations with Japan Airlines, with Qatar Airways, with local groups, but nothing is concretized. The Malaysian government cannot continue putting infinite money. If Malaysia Airlines does not find a strong industrial partner that helps it to resurge, its future is very uncertain. Hopefully one day it can overcome the tragedy, but meanwhile it follows being an airline at risk. Until here, the 10 airlines that are in bankruptcy or at risk in this 2026. From South Africa to Malaysia, from Argentina to Scandinavia, all share the same fragility. Aviation is a business of very tight margins where any crisis can be the final blow. Some of these airlines have more than 100 years of history, others are relatively young, but all are today on the edge of the abyss. If you have tickets with any of them, keep yourself informed, follow the news, see if your flights are canceled, and if it is necessary, complain. And if you are thinking of buying a cheap ticket with one of these airlines, think if the risk is worth it. Because a cheap ticket can turn out very expensive if they leave you stranded at thousands of kilometers from home.